Everyone thought she was doomed by the snakebite, but I sucked out the venom. The desert stretched endlessly under the merciless twin suns of Proxima Viridia, a planet that had become humanity's latest attempt at interspecies cooperation. Major Nick Harrington wiped sweat from his brow as he trudged through the shifting sands, his muscular frame already adapting to the planet's punishing heat. 3 days on this godforsaken rock, and he was already being sent out on reconnaissance. Command said the Viridians were supposed to meet us at these coordinates, he muttered to himself, checking the holographic map projected from his wrist device. But all I see is more damn sand. As a veteran scout for the United Earth Forces, Nick had seen his fair share of alien worlds, but something about Proxima Viridia made his skin prickle with unease. Maybe it was the massive mothership that loomed overhead, like an artificial moon, casting long shadows across the landscape. A constant reminder that humans weren't the dominant species here. His radio crackled. "Major Harrington, status report. Still no sign of the Viridian delegation, Colonel. Just dunes and more dunes. Keep looking. Command says establishing relations with the natives is priority 1. We need their knowledge to survive on this hellhole." Nick sighed. "Copy that." As he crested another dune, the landscape suddenly changed. A small oasis appeared before him, surrounded by strange, twisted vegetation that seemed to pulse with an inner light. And there, by a pool of iridescent liquid, stood a group of aliens. His breath caught in his throat at the sight of them. The Viridians were vaguely humanoid, but with skin in various shades of violet and indigo, adorned with intricate patterns of lighter lines that seemed to shift and change with their movements. Most imposing were the soldiers, tall, muscular males with cobalt skin, clad in sleek battle armor, their expressions unreadable as they gripped weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. But it was the female among them that captured Nick's full attention. Unlike the warriors, her skin was a softer lavender, her curves accentuated by a form-fitting dark suit that left little to the imagination. Snow-white hair cascaded down her shoulders, contrasting beautifully with her violet skin. Her eyes, large and almond-shaped, were the color of burnished gold. Nick approached slowly, hands raised in the universal gesture of peace. "I'm Major Nicholas Harrington, representative of Earth's colonial forces." The female stepped forward, her movements graceful and fluid. "I am Solara, diplomatic liaison of the Viridian High Council. We welcome you to—" Her words cut off abruptly as she let out a piercing scream, her beautiful face contorting in agony. Nick's combat instincts kicked in immediately, scanning for threats. There, slithering back into the underbrush, a serpentine creature with metallic scales and what looked like suction cups instead of fangs along its jaw. "Venom Striker!" one of the blue-skinned warriors shouted, but none moved to help. Instead, they stepped back, their faces grim. Solara collapsed to her knees, clutching her thigh where an angry red welt was already forming. The skin around it was turning a sickly gray, dark veins spreading outward at an alarming rate. "What the hell are you waiting for?" Nick shouted at the warriors. "Help her!" The tallest warrior shook his head. "The venom of the striker is fatal. There is nothing to be done. She is already dead." "Like hell she is," Nick growled, dropping to his knees beside her. Without hesitation, he tore the fabric of her suit away from the wound. The bite was already festering, pulsing with a greenish glow. Nick knew the protocol for venomous bites from his survival training. Without medical equipment, there was only one primitive option. He lowered his mouth to her thigh, pressing his lips against her skin, and began to suck out the poison, spitting it onto the sand beside them. The Viridian warriors watched in stunned silence, their weapons lowering slightly in their shock. The poison was bitter and burned his mouth, but Nick continued, spitting and sucking, until he tasted blood instead of venom. Finally, he sat back, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. Solara's golden eyes were wide with disbelief as she stared at him. "Why?" she whispered, her voice weak but steady. "Why would you risk yourself for me?" Nick shrugged, offering her a half-smile. "Where I come from, we don't leave people behind, human or otherwise." He helped her to her feet, supporting her weight against his side. The warriors approached cautiously, their earlier dismissal replaced with something that looked almost like respect. "The striker's venom has claimed countless lives," said the tall warrior. studying Nick with newfound interest. No Viridian would have done what you did. Perhaps there is more to humans than we believed. Name's Nick, he said, extending his free hand. And you are? Commander Thorn, the warrior replied, clasping Nick's forearm in a firm grip. Perhaps we should continue our diplomatic discussions back at our outpost, after our medics tend to Solara. As they made their way across the desert, Nick couldn't help but notice how Solara leaned into him, her body warm against his side. Her golden eyes kept finding his, filled with curiosity and something else he couldn't quite identify. You know, he said quietly, this wasn't exactly how I planned our first contact to go. A smile curved her lips. I find that sometimes, Major Harrington, the most meaningful connections begin in the most unexpected ways. Looking up at the massive mothership hovering above them, Nick had the distinct feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than a simple rescue in the desert. The Viridian outpost rose from the desert like a mirage, a collection of gleaming spires that seemed to defy gravity, connected by translucent bridges that shimmered in the harsh sunlight. As they approached, Nick noticed how the structures appeared to pulse with the same inner light as the vegetation he'd seen earlier. Impressive, he murmured, still supporting Solara against his side. Her condition had stabilized, but she remained weak, her normally vibrant skin still pale. Our architecture adapts to its environment, she explained, her voice soft near his ear. The buildings absorb solar energy during the day and release it at night, maintaining optimal temperature and providing light. Commander Thorn led them through an entrance that dilated open at their approach. Inside, the temperature dropped immediately to a comfortable level, and Nick felt his tense muscles begin to relax. Our medical bay is this way, Thorn said, gesturing down a corridor that seemed to be made of the same translucent material as the bridges. Our chief physician, Maris, will attend to Solara. As they entered the medical bay, a Viridian male with pale blue skin and intricate silver markings looked up from a holographic display. His eyes widened at the sight of Solara. Striker Venom, he asked, immediately helping her onto an examination platform. Yes, Thorn replied. The human extracted much of it. Maris turned to Nick, his expression unreadable. You put your mouth on the wound? Where I come from, it's an old technique, Nick explained, suddenly feeling self-conscious under the alien scrutiny. Not exactly high-tech, but it works in a pinch. Fascinating, Maris murmured, running a handheld scanner over Solara's leg. By all accounts, she should be dead. The venom concentration in her bloodstream is still high, but below lethal levels. He looked at Nick with newfound respect. Your primitive method saved her life. Will she recover fully? Nick asked, surprised by how much he cared about the answer. Yes, but she needs rest and treatment. Maris turned to a cabinet and retrieved a vial of shimmering liquid. This will neutralize the remaining toxin. As Maris administered the treatment, Thorn motioned for Nick to follow him. Come. While Solara recovers, we should discuss the purpose of your visit. The High Council is eager to establish formal relations with your species. Nick followed Thorn to what appeared to be a command center, where several Viridian warriors were monitoring various displays. They all turned to stare as Nick entered, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright suspicion. This is Major Harrington of Earth, Thorn announced. He has proven himself a worthy ally today. One of the warriors, slightly shorter than Thorn but with broader shoulders, stepped forward. So this is what humans look like up close, smaller than I expected. Lieutenant Krell, Thorn said by way of introduction, my second in command. Nick extended his hand, remembering too late that the gesture might not translate across species. To his surprise, Krell clasped his forearm in the same manner Thorn had earlier. Any friend of Thorn's is a friend of mine, Krell said, though his tone suggested he was reserving judgment. I appreciate the welcome, Nick replied. I'm here to discuss the Joint Colony project. My superiors are eager to begin construction, but we need your expertise to survive in this environment. Thorn nodded. The desert is unforgiving to those who don't understand its ways. We've lived here for generations, adapting to its rhythms. Your people would be wise to learn from our experience. For the next hour, they discussed the practicalities of the Joint Colony, water reclamation, solar shielding, and defense against the local wildlife. Nick was impressed by the Viridians' knowledge and their willingness to share it. Your technology is remarkable, he commented, examining a 3D model of the proposed colony. especially these water extraction systems. And your propulsion technology is equally impressive, Thorne replied. The speed at which your ships traverse the void between stars has caught the attention of our scientists. As they talked, Nick couldn't help but notice how the initial tension in the room had gradually dissipated. His act of saving Solara seemed to have opened doors that might otherwise have remained closed. Their discussion was interrupted when the medical bay doors slid open and Solara entered, her stride steady but cautious. She had changed into a fresh suit, this one a deep indigo that complemented her lavender skin. Her white hair was now braided intricately down her back. "You should be resting," Maris protested, following behind her. "I've rested enough," she replied, her golden eyes finding Nick's. "Besides, I wanted to properly thank my savior." Nick felt a warmth creep up his neck. "Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said, moving closer. "They wouldn't. As you saw, even my own people were prepared to let me die." There was no bitterness in her voice, just a statement of fact. "The Striker's venom is too potent," Thorne explained to Nick. "Our biology offers no defense against it. We've lost many to its bite. Which makes what you did all the more remarkable," Solara continued, now standing directly before Nick. "You risked your life for someone you just met, someone not even of your species." Before Nick could respond, an alarm blared throughout the outpost. The displays in the command center flashed red, and the Viridian warriors immediately snapped to attention. "Perimeter breach," Krell announced, his fingers dancing across a control panel. "Sector 7. "Show me," Thorne commanded. A holographic image appeared in the center of the room, showing a section of the desert near the outpost. A cloud of dust was rising on the horizon, and within it, dark shapes moved with alarming speed. "Sand raiders," Thorne growled. "They must have detected your arrival, human." "Raiders?" Nick asked, his hand instinctively moving to the sidearm at his hip. "Nomadic predators," Solara explained, her expression grim. "They attack settlements, steal resources, and take prisoners. They're particularly interested in new species, for their collection." "Collection?" Nick didn't like the sound of that. "They're trophy hunters," Krell said bluntly, "and you, human, would make a unique addition." Thorne was already issuing orders, his warriors moving with practiced efficiency. "Secure the outpost, activate the shield generators. Krell, prepare a defense team." "I can help," Nick offered, drawing his weapon. "I'm not just a diplomat." Thorne studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Very well. You'll join Krell's team, but be warned, these raiders are not to be underestimated." As Nick checked his weapon, Solara approached him again. "Be careful," she said softly. "You've already saved my life once today. I'd hate to see you lose yours." He gave her a confident smile. "Don't worry. Where I come from, we have a saying, once lucky, twice good." "What does that mean?" she asked, her head tilting in confusion. "It means," he said, holstering his weapon, "that saving you wasn't luck, and neither will be dealing with these raiders." As he followed Krell and the defense team toward the perimeter, Nick couldn't help but feel a surge of adrenaline. This wasn't how he'd expected his diplomatic mission to go, but if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was adapting to unexpected situations. And if these sand raiders wanted to add a human to their collection, they were in for one hell of a surprise. The sand raiders struck with a ferocity that surprised even the battle-hardened Viridians. Nick crouched behind a barricade at the outpost perimeter, his pulse rifle braced against his shoulder as he surveyed the approaching threat. "Those aren't primitive nomads," he muttered to Krell, who was positioned beside him. "Look at their weapons." The raiders rode on massive, six-legged beasts, their bodies protected by armor that seemed to shimmer and adapt to the desert's colors. But it was their weapons that caught Nick's attention. Sleek, pulsing rifles that fired concentrated energy bolts with devastating precision. "You're right," Krell replied, his eyes narrowing. "That's military-grade tech, far beyond raider capabilities." A bolt of energy struck nearby, sending shards of the barricade flying. Nick ducked, then rose to return fire. His first shot caught a raider square in the chest, sending the alien tumbling from its mount. The second and third shots followed in rapid succession, each finding their mark with deadly accuracy. Krell stared at him, mandibles twitching in what Nick was beginning to recognize as surprise. "Your aim is exceptional." "Special Forces training," Nick replied, already lining up his next shot. We humans take our combat skills seriously. As the battle intensified, Nick found himself falling into a familiar rhythm. The controlled breathing, the calculated movements, the split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. It was a dance he knew well, and one he performed with lethal grace. The Viridian warriors fought bravely, but they were clearly unaccustomed to this level of technology from the raiders. Nick watched as one after another fell back, wounded or overwhelmed. "We need to change tactics," he shouted to Krell over the din of battle. "They're picking us off from a distance. We need to get closer, make it personal." Krell looked skeptical. "Their mounts give them too much advantage in the open." Nick grinned, a fierce expression that seemed to unnerve the Viridian lieutenant. "Then let's take away that advantage." Without waiting for a response, Nick vaulted over the barricade and sprinted toward the nearest dune, using the terrain for cover. He heard Krell curse behind him, then the sound of the lieutenant following. Moving from cover to cover, Nick worked his way closer to the raiders' flank. When he was within range, he pulled a small device from his belt, a sonic disruptor, standard issue for Earth's special forces. "Cover your ears," he warned Krell, then activated the device. The effect was immediate and devastating. The raiders' mounts reared in panic, throwing their riders and charging in all directions. In the chaos that followed, Nick and Krell struck, taking down disoriented raiders with precision shots. The tide of battle turned quickly after that. With their mounts scattered and their formation broken, the raiders fell back, retreating into the desert. But not before Nick managed to capture one, a smaller alien with mottled green skin and 4 arms, each ending in clawed digits. "Let me go!" the raider hissed in a surprisingly understandable dialect. "You have no right!" "You attacked us," Nick replied coldly, securing the alien's wrist with restraints. "That gives us every right." Back at the outpost, the mood was a mixture of relief and tension. They had repelled the attack, but at a cost. Several Viridian warriors were wounded, and part of the outpost's outer wall had been breached. Solara rushed to Nick as he entered, her golden eyes wide with concern. "You're hurt," she said, reaching for a gash on his forearm that he hadn't even noticed in the heat of battle. "It's nothing," he assured her, though he didn't pull away from her touch. Her fingers were cool against his skin, sending an unexpected shiver up his spine. "Your combat skills are remarkable," she said, her voice low as she applied a healing salve to his wound. "I've never seen anyone move like that." Nick felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the desert heat. "Just doing my job." Thorne approached, his expression grave. "The prisoner is secured, but this was no ordinary raid. Those weapons?" "Military grade," Nick confirmed. "Someone's supplying them." "But who?" Solara asked, her hand still resting on Nick's arm. "And why?" "That's what we need to find out." Nick's gaze met hers, and something unspoken passed between them. A connection that transcended species, forged in the crucible of shared danger. Later, as the outpost's medical team tended to the wounded, Nick found himself alone with Solara in a quiet corner of the command center. The adrenaline of battle had faded, leaving behind a different kind of tension. "You could have been killed today," she said softly, her golden eyes searching his. "Occupational hazard," he replied with a half smile. "Besides, I couldn't let anything happen to this place. Not when I just got here." "Is that the only reason?" Her question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning. Nick stepped closer, close enough to catch the subtle scent of her. Something like desert flowers after rain. "No," he admitted, "not the only reason." Her hand rose to his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart through his combat suit. "Your species fascinates me, Nick. You're so passionate, so willing to risk everything." "That's just who we are," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "We live fully. We feel deeply." "Show me," she murmured, her lips parting slightly. The kiss was tentative at first, a crossing of boundaries both physical and metaphorical. Her lips were softer than he'd imagined, yielding yet responsive. As the kiss deepened, Nick felt a surge of connection that transcended the physical, a meeting of minds as much as bodies. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Solara's patterns were glowing with a soft, pulsing light. "That's new," Nick commented, tracing one of the luminescent lines on her cheek. She laughed softly, a musical sound. "It's how my people express intense emotion." Before Nick could respond, the command center door slid open, and Thorn entered, his expression urgent. "The prisoner is talking," he announced, "and you both need to hear this." The captured raider sat bound to a chair in the outpost's security chamber, his forearms secured behind his back. His mottled green skin glistened with sweat under the harsh lights, and his yellow eyes darted nervously between Nick, Solara, and Commander Thorn. "Speak," Thorn commanded, looming over the prisoner. "Who supplied you with those weapons?" The raider's mandibles clicked anxiously. "If I tell you, they'll kill me." "If you don't tell us," Nick said calmly, stepping forward, "you'll have bigger problems than death." He didn't elaborate on the threat, finding that imagination often worked better than specifics. The raider studied Nick, clearly unnerved by the human's alien appearance. "The weapons came from High Counselor Vex," he finally admitted. "He's been arming raider bands for months now." Solara gasped. "That's impossible. Counselor Vex is one of our most respected leaders." "He wants the human alliance to fail," the raider continued. "Says your kind will bring nothing but destruction to our world." He fixed his gaze on Nick. "But that's not the worst of it." "What could be worse than treason?" Thorn growled. "The digging," the raider whispered, his voice dropping so low they had to lean in to hear. "Your colony construction. It's disturbing something beneath the sands, something ancient, something hungry." A chill ran down Nick's spine despite the desert heat. "What are you talking about?" "The burrowers," the raider said, genuine fear evident in his voice. "Ancient predators that hibernate deep beneath the surface for centuries. The vibrations from your machines are waking them. Vex knows this. He's using it. He thinks if enough colonists die, the humans will leave." Thorn and Solara exchanged alarmed glances. "The burrowers are just old tales," Thorn said, but uncertainty tinged his voice. "Stories to frighten children." "Then why have 3 of our scouting parties disappeared in the past month?" the raider challenged. "Why are there tremors where there have never been tremors before?" Nick's tactical mind was already racing. "If this is true, we need to warn the colony, and we need proof of Vex's involvement." "I'll contact the High Council immediately," Solara said, her golden eyes clouded with concern. "But they won't act against Vex without evidence." "Then we'll get evidence," Nick replied firmly, "and we'll need to investigate these burrowers." After securing the prisoner, Nick, Solara, and Thorn retreated to Thorn's private quarters to strategize. The room was sparsely decorated but comfortable, with strange bioluminescent plants providing soft illumination. "If Vex is truly behind this, he'll have records somewhere," Thorn said, pacing the room. "Communications, supply manifests, payment trails." "We need to access his private terminal," Solara suggested, "but it's in his quarters in the High Council chambers, heavily guarded and secured." Nick leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Then we need a distraction and someone who can get past his security systems." "I can handle the systems," Solara said. "As diplomatic liaison, I have access to most areas of the council chambers." "And I can create a distraction," Thorn offered. "A security drill, perhaps." Nick nodded. "Good. We move tomorrow. But tonight..." He glanced at the chronometer on the wall. "We should rest. It's been a hell of a day." As Thorn left to make preparations, Nick found himself alone with Solara again. The tension between them, momentarily forgotten during the interrogation, returned with renewed intensity. "You should have quarters prepared for you," she said, moving closer, "but the guest rooms were damaged in the attack." "I can sleep anywhere," Nick assured her. "Military training." Solara's patterns began to glow softly in the dimly lit room. "There's another option. My quarters are undamaged and spacious." Nick felt his pulse quicken. "Are you sure that's appropriate? I wouldn't want to impose." "Among my people," she said, her voice taking on a husky quality, "saving a life creates a bond, a debt that must be honored." Her fingers traced the outline of his jaw. "I still owe you for drawing the venom from my body." "Where I come from," Nick replied, his voice low, "we don't expect payment for helping others." "This isn't payment," she whispered, stepping closer until he could feel the warmth radiating from her body. "This is connection. My people believe that when death is cheated, life must be celebrated." Her lips found his, and this time there was nothing tentative about their kiss. It was hungry, primal, a claiming of sorts. Nick responded in kind, his arms encircling her waist, pulling her against him. When they finally broke apart, Solara's entire body seemed to be glowing, the patterns on her skin pulsing with a hypnotic rhythm. "Your quarters sound perfect," Nick murmured against her neck. Her quarters were indeed spacious, dominated by a large sleeping platform covered in what looked like silken cushions. Strange, sweet-scented flowers bloomed in recessed alcoves, their perfume filling the air. "Our customs may be different from yours," Solara said as she led him inside, the door sealing behind them with a soft hiss. "But some desires transcend species." What followed was a discovery of differences and similarities, of alien anatomy and universal pleasure. Their coupling was both strange and familiar, a dance of exploration and instinct that left them both breathless and entwined in the silken sheets. Afterward, as they lay together in the soft glow of Solara's bioluminescent patterns, Nick traced the lines on her shoulder with gentle fingers. "That was educational," he said with a smile. She laughed, the sound like music. "Is that how humans describe such experiences? As educational?" "Sometimes," he admitted, "when we're trying to be polite about how mind-blowing it was." Her expression grew serious. "There's something I should tell you. The venom from the striker, it changes those who survive it, creates a connection." Nick propped himself up on one elbow. "What kind of connection?" "A psychic bond of sorts. It's rare. Most victims die, but those who survive often report sensing the emotions, sometimes even thoughts of the person who saved them." She placed a hand over his heart. "I've been feeling your emotions since you drew the poison from me. Your courage, your determination, your desire." Nick absorbed this information, surprised to find he wasn't alarmed by it. "Is that why you—" "No," she said firmly. "The bond doesn't create feelings. It only allows them to be shared. What I feel for you is real, Nick, as real as the danger we face tomorrow." As if to punctuate her words, a faint tremor shook the room, causing the hanging lights to sway gently. "The burrowers?" Nick asked quietly. Solara nodded, her golden eyes reflecting the soft light. "If the legends are true, we may have awakened something far more dangerous than political conspiracy." Nick pulled her closer, taking comfort in her warmth. "Then we'd better get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be interesting." Dawn broke over Proxima Viridia with an explosion of crimson and gold that painted the desert in fire. Nick stood at the viewport in Solara's quarters, watching the twin suns climb above the horizon while she prepared for their mission. "Beautiful," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "The double sunrise?" Solara asked, joining him at the viewport. She wore formal diplomatic attire now, a flowing robe of deep indigo that complemented her violet skin while concealing various tech devices they might need. "That too," Nick replied with a smile, his eyes lingering on her. The intimacy they'd shared during the night had changed something between them, deepening their connection in ways that transcended the physical. She returned his smile, the patterns on her skin pulsing softly. "Last night was unexpected." "Regrets?" he asked, suddenly concerned. "None," she assured him, reaching up to trace the line of his jaw. "Among my people, such connections are rare and precious. We do not give ourselves lightly." Nick caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "Where I come from, we feel the same way." A soft chime interrupted the moment, thorns signaling that it was time to move. Their plan was simple but dangerous. Infiltrate the High Council chambers, access Vex's private terminal, and find evidence of his treachery while investigating his connection to the burrowers. "Ready?" Nick asked, checking his concealed sidearm. Solara nodded, her expression turning serious. "Remember, in the council chambers, follow my lead. Viridian politics can be lethal." "Noted," Nick replied, "though politics are pretty cutthroat on Earth too." The journey to the High Council chambers took them through the heart of the Viridian settlement, a sprawling complex of gleaming spires and translucent walkways that hummed with activity. Nick drew curious stares from passing Viridians, many of whom had never seen a human before. "They're fascinated by you," Solara explained as they walked. "Humans are still something of a mystery to most of my people." "The feeling's mutual," Nick admitted. "Your civilization is incredible." The High Council chambers occupied the tallest spire in the settlement, its peak disappearing into the clouds. As they approached, Nick noticed the increased security, armored warriors similar to Thorn, but with more elaborate insignia. "Elite guards," Solara whispered, "loyal to the Council above all else." Inside the building was a marvel of alien architecture, soaring ceilings supported by columns that seemed to be made of living material, pulsing with the same bioluminescence as Solara's skin patterns. Water flowed in carefully designed channels along the walls, creating a pleasant ambient sound that masked their conversation. "Vex's quarters are on the upper level," Solara said, guiding Nick toward a gravity lift. "Thorn should be initiating the security drill any moment now." As if on cue, alarms began to sound throughout the building. Guards rushed past them, heading toward the lower levels where Thorn was creating his distraction. "Perfect timing," Nick murmured as they stepped onto the lift. "How long do we have?" 10 minutes, maybe less," Solara replied. "Vex will be in the emergency council session with the other leaders." The upper level was deserted when they arrived, the guards having responded to the alarm. Solara led Nick down a corridor lined with ornate doors until they reached one marked with a distinctive symbol. "Vex's private quarters," she explained, placing her hand on a scanner beside the door. To Nick's surprise, it chimed and slid open. "As diplomatic liaison, I have emergency access to all council members' quarters." "Convenient," Nick remarked as they slipped inside. The room beyond was opulent by any standard, filled with exotic plants, strange artifacts, and what appeared to be trophies from various hunts. A large desk dominated one wall, a holographic terminal hovering above it. "Keep watch while I access his files," Solara said, moving to the terminal. Nick positioned himself near the door, his senses on high alert. Through their newfound bond, he could feel Solara's tension as her fingers danced across the holographic interface. "Anything?" he asked after a moment. "Yes," she replied, her voice tight with anger. "Communications with the raiders, weapons manifests, payment records. It's all here. Vex has been systematically undermining the Alliance for months." "What about the burrowers?" Solara's fingers paused, her expression shifting to one of horror. "By the ancestors. He's not just aware of them. He's been actively trying to wake them." "Why would he do that?" Nick moved to her side, studying the strange symbols on the display. "According to these notes, he believes he can control them using some kind of ancient technology." She pointed to schematics of a device. "He thinks they can be weaponized against off-world threats." "Including humans," Nick guessed grimly. "Yes, but he's wrong. The burrowers cannot be controlled. They're apex predators with rudimentary hive intelligence. If they fully awaken..." She shuddered. "We need to copy these files and get out of here," Nick said, checking the time. "Thorn's distraction won't last much longer." Solara nodded, transferring the data to a small device she carried. Just as she finished, Nick felt a tremor run through the building, stronger than the one they'd felt the night before. "That's not part of Thorn's distraction," he said, steadying himself against the desk. Solara's eyes widened. "No, it's not." The tremor intensified, and a distant alarm, different from the security drill, began to wail. Solara's communication device chimed urgently. "Solara," Thorn's voice came through, tight with tension. "We have a situation. The burrowers. They've breached the lower levels of the settlement." "We're on our way," she replied, grabbing Nick's arm. "We have the evidence against Vex." As they rushed from the room, another stronger tremor shook the building, sending decorative items crashing to the floor. Nick caught Solara as she stumbled, pulling her close. "Looks like our timing could have been better," he said with grim humor. "Or perfect," she countered. "The council will have to listen now." They made it to the gravity lift just as the power fluctuated, the lights dimming momentarily. Nick felt a surge of protectiveness towards Solara, intensified by their bond and the night they'd shared. "Whatever happens," he said as they descended, "we face it together." Her patterns glowed in response, and through their connection, Nick felt her determination and, surprisingly, her trust in him. It was a heady feeling, knowing that this remarkable being had placed her faith in him so completely. "Together," she agreed, her golden eyes meeting his, "the way you face the striker Venom for me." As the lift doors opened onto chaos, Nick drew his weapon, ready to face whatever came next. The burrowers might be awakening, and Vex might be plotting against them. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to let anything happen to Solara or the future they might build together. Chaos reigned in the lower levels of the High Council spire. Viridian warriors fought desperately against massive creatures that burst through the floor. Burrowers, just as the legends described them. They were nightmarish beings, each the size of a small transport vehicle, with armored exoskeletons and multiple limbs ending in vicious claws. Their eyeless heads housed gaping maws filled with concentric rings of teeth that rotated as they fed. "We need to get to the council chamber," Solara shouted over the din of battle and alarms. "It's on the central level. They'll be coordinating the defense from there." Nick nodded, his combat training kicking in as he assessed their situation. "These corridors are too exposed. Is there another way?" "The maintenance shafts," she replied, pulling him toward an inconspicuous panel in the wall. "They run throughout the spire." As they navigated the narrow shafts, the sounds of battle echoed all around them. Through their bond, Nick could feel Solara's fear, not for herself, but for her people. "Vex has no idea what he's unleashed," she whispered as they crawled through the cramped space. "The burrowers were sealed away by our ancestors for a reason. They nearly wiped out our civilization once before. History has a way of repeating itself when people don't learn from it," Nick replied grimly. They emerged from the shaft into a corridor just outside the council chamber. Guards stood at attention, despite the chaos, their weapons trained on the new arrivals. "Stand down," Solara commanded. "I have urgent information for the council." The guards hesitated, then stepped aside as another tremor shook the building. Inside the chamber, a semicircle of Viridian leaders sat on elevated platforms, engaged in heated debate. At the center stood a tall, imposing figure with deep blue skin and elaborate silver markings. High Counselor Vex. "Must evacuate the spire immediately," one counselor was saying as Nick and Solara entered. "Nonsense," Vex replied, his voice smooth and authoritative. "The defenses will hold. This is merely an isolated incident." "It is no isolated incident," Solara announced, striding forward with Nick at her side. "And you know it, Counselor Vex." The chamber fell silent as all eyes turned to them. Vex's expression darkened at the sight of the human. "What is the meaning of this interruption, Liaison Solara? And why have you brought this outsider into our sacred chambers?" "Because he may be our only hope of survival," she replied, her voice ringing with conviction. She held up the data device. "We have evidence that Counselor Vex has been deliberately attempting to awaken the burrowers, believing he could control them as weapons against potential threats, including our human allies." Murmurs of shock and disbelief rippled through the chamber. Vex's face contorted with rage. "These are absurd accusations. The human has poisoned your mind, Solara." "The only poison here," Nick interjected, stepping forward, "is the one you've been spreading, fear and distrust of humans to mask your own agenda." Vex's eyes narrowed. "Guards, remove them!" But before the guards could move, Thorn burst into the chamber, his armor damaged and his weapon still hot from discharge. "Counselors, the lower 3 levels have been breached," he reported, ignoring the protocol he was violating. "The burrowers are moving upward. We cannot hold them back with conventional weapons." "Show them the evidence," Nick urged Solara. She plugged the device into the chamber's central display system, and immediately Vex's private files were projected for all to see. Communications with raiders, weapons transfers, and most damning of all, his research on awakening and controlling the burrowers. "This is treason," the eldest counselor declared, rising from her seat. "Vex has endangered our entire civilization." "You fools," Vex snarled, backing away. "The humans will bring destruction to our world one way or another. I sought only to protect us, to give us a weapon powerful enough to maintain our independence." As the counselors argued, Nick noticed something strange. The tremors had stopped, but a different sensation had begun. A tingling in his blood, centered around his heart. The same feeling he'd had after sucking the venom from Solara's wound. "Solara," he said quietly, "the striker venom, you said it creates a bond. What else do you know about it?" She turned to him, confused by the sudden change of subject. "It's one of the deadliest toxins on our world. Why? Because I'm feeling it again. Right now." He pressed a hand to his chest. "And it's getting stronger the closer the burrowers come." Solara's eyes widened. "The ancient texts, they say the strikers were once used by our ancestors as protection against the burrowers. Their venom is the only substance the burrowers fear." Nick's mind raced. That's why Vex's plan would never work. He didn't account for the natural deterrent, but I still have the venom in my system from when I saved you. You can't be suggesting, she began, alarm coloring her voice. I am, he confirmed. I need to get close to them. The venom in my bloodstream might repel them long enough for your people to mount an effective defense. It's too dangerous, she protested, gripping his arm. The concentration in your system isn't high enough to affect more than one or two of them. You'd be sacrificing yourself for nothing. Another violent tremor shook the chamber as the burrowers drew nearer. Nick looked around at the frightened counselors, at Thorn preparing for a last stand, and finally at Solara, her golden eyes filled with fear for him. Then we need more venom, he said decisively. Are there any strikers kept in the settlement? For research, perhaps? Thorn overheard and joined their conversation. The medical bay has several specimens. They extract the venom to develop anti-venoms. Perfect, Nick said. I need you to take me there. Now. What are you planning? Thorn asked, his expression wary. Something incredibly stupid and human, Nick replied with a grim smile. But it might just work. Solara stepped closer, her patterns glowing with intensity. I'm coming with you. No, Nick said firmly. You need to stay here. Convince the council to organize an evacuation, just in case this doesn't work. Nick, she whispered, pressing her forehead to his in a Viridian gesture of deep affection. Don't you dare die on me. Not after everything we've shared. He kissed her quickly, not caring about the audience of shocked counselors. I don't plan to. We have unfinished business, you and I. As Nick and Thorn prepared to leave, Vex made his move. With surprising speed, he lunged for a ceremonial weapon displayed on the chamber wall, then grabbed the nearest counselor as a hostage. No one leaves, he shouted. This chamber will be sealed until my shuttle is prepared. I will not be here when those creatures arrive. Nick didn't hesitate. With the precision of his special forces training, he drew his sidearm and fired, the shot grazing Vex's arm and causing him to drop both the weapon and his hostage. That was your only warning, Nick said coldly as Viridian guards swarmed Vex. Next time, I won't miss. With Vex secured, Nick turned back to Solara. Keep them safe. I'll be back before you know it. As he and Thorn raced toward the medical bay, Nick felt the tingling in his blood intensify. The burrowers were getting closer, drawn to the vibrations and heat of the settlement. Whatever he was planning, he needed to do it fast, because the only thing standing between the Viridians and extinction might be the venom he'd once sucked from Solara's wound, and his willingness to risk everything once again. The medical bay was in disarray when Nick and Thorn arrived, equipment scattered and patients evacuated. Only the chief physician, Maris, remained, frantically gathering essential supplies. We need the striker specimens, Thorn demanded without preamble. Maris looked up, startled. They're in the secure containment unit. But why? No time to explain, Nick cut in. The burrowers are getting closer. As if to emphasize his point, another tremor shook the facility, stronger than before. Ceiling panels crashed down around them. Maris led them to a reinforced door at the back of the bay. Inside, transparent containers housed several striker specimens, serpentine creatures with metallic scales, and those distinctive suction cup fangs that had nearly claimed Solara's life. What exactly are you planning? Maris asked as Nick examined the creatures. Something that might sound crazy, Nick replied. The striker venom repels the burrowers, right? But I need more than what's in my system to make a difference. Understanding dawned on Maris's face. You want to extract the venom and… What? Inject yourself with it. That would kill you instantly. Not inject, Nick said, his mind racing. When I sucked the venom from Solara's wound, something happened. The venom bonded with my DNA differently than it does with Viridian physiology. Maris's eyes widened. That's why you survived exposure. Fascinating. Human DNA must have some unique property that neutralizes the lethal components while preserving the repellent effect. Exactly, Nick said. So what if we could synthesize that combination? Create a compound of striker venom and human DNA that could be weaponized against the burrowers? Theoretically possible, Maris admitted, already moving to an analysis station. But we'd need significant quantities of both components and time to synthesize. Time we don't have, Thorn interrupted as another, more violent tremor shook the room. They're almost through the central level. Nick made a quick decision. Take my blood, as much as you need, and contact the human colony. Tell them to send all available medical personnel with blood donations. We'll create the compound together. What followed was a blur of activity. Nick's blood was drawn, analyzed, and combined with Stryker Venom under Maris's expert guidance. Through his comm unit, Thorn coordinated with both Viridian warriors and human colonists, who responded to the crisis with remarkable speed. Within an hour, the medical bay had transformed into an impromptu production facility. Human medical staff worked alongside Viridian scientists, their combined expertise achieving what neither could have done alone. It's working, Maris announced, holding up a vial of iridescent fluid. The compound is stable. The human DNA neutralizes the toxic elements while preserving the repellent properties. How do we deploy it? Nick asked, slightly lightheaded from his blood donation, but still on his feet. The environmental control system, Thorn suggested. If we can aerosolize the compound and introduce it through the ventilation, it could cover the entire settlement. We'd need more, much more, Maris cautioned. Then we'll make more, Nick said firmly. Every human in the colony will donate if necessary. As they worked, Solara arrived with several council members, their faces grim but determined. The burrowers have breached the central level, she reported. We've evacuated as many as possible to the upper levels, but we're running out of space. Her eyes found Nick's, and through their bond, he felt her relief at seeing him alive, mixed with fear for what was to come. He moved to her side, drawing strength from her presence. We have a plan, he told her, explaining the compound they were creating. The eldest counselor stepped forward, her ancient eyes appraising Nick with new respect. First you saved Solara by drawing venom from her wound, and now you offer your blood to save our entire people. Humans are not what we expected. We're full of surprises, Nick replied with a tired smile. Indeed, the counselor agreed, and it seems we have much to learn from each other if we survive this day. With the council's authority behind them, the production of the compound accelerated. Human colonists arrived in waves, rolling up their sleeves without hesitation. The Viridians watched in amazement as human after human volunteered their blood for a people not their own. Why do they help us? One young Viridian scientist asked Solara as they worked. They barely know our kind. Because that's who they are, she replied, her gaze finding Nick across the room. They don't leave people behind, human or otherwise. 4 hours later, they had enough of the compound to deploy through the environmental systems. The burrowers had claimed the lower and central levels of the settlement, but their advance had slowed, seemingly confused by the traces of Stryker venom already present in some areas. Nick, Solara, and Thorn made their way to the Environmental Control Center, carrying the precious canisters of aerosolized compound. The journey was perilous, requiring them to skirt areas already overrun by the creatures. Once we introduce the compound, how long before it takes effect? Nick asked as they reached the control center. Minutes if we're lucky, Maris replied through their comm link. The burrowers' sensory systems are highly sensitive. With trembling hands, not from fear but exhaustion, Nick loaded the canisters into the distribution system. Solara worked the controls, programming the ventilation to spread the compound throughout every level of the settlement. Ready? She asked, her finger hovering over the activation switch. Nick took her hand in his. Together! They pressed the switch as one. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a fine mist began to emerge from the ventilation ports, spreading through the corridors and chambers of the massive structure. The effect was almost immediate. From below came sounds of confusion, the chittering and screeching of burrowers in distress. Monitoring screens showed the creatures retreating, burrowing back into the ground from which they'd emerged. It's working, Thorn breathed, watching the displays with disbelief. Of course it's working, Nick said, slumping against the control panel in exhaustion. Humanity for the win. Solara laughed, a sound of pure relief and joy that echoed through the control center. She threw her arms around Nick, holding him tightly as if afraid he might disappear. You did it, she whispered against his neck. You saved us all. We did it, he corrected, pulling back to look into her golden eyes. Humans and Viridians together. 3 days later, the settlement was beginning to recover. The burrowers had retreated deep beneath the surface, repelled by the compound that now permeated the structure. Repair teams worked around the clock to restore damaged sections, while scientists studied the compound, refining it for long-term protection. Vex faced justice before the High Council, stripped of his rank and sentenced to exile for his crimes against both species. The alliance between humans and Viridians, far from being destroyed by his machinations, had been strengthened through shared adversity. Nick stood on a balcony overlooking the desert, watching the twin suns set in a blaze of color. Solara joined him, her violet skin glowing softly in the fading light. "The Council has appointed me as permanent liaison to the human colony," she said, leaning against the railing beside him. "It seems your people have made quite an impression." "Just doing what comes naturally," he replied with a smile. "Helping those in need, fighting impossible odds, saving beautiful alien women from venomous snakes." She laughed, the sound still as captivating as the first time he'd heard it. "Such modesty. That's us humans, humbled to a fault." Her expression grew serious. "The bond between us, it's stronger now. The scientists believe it was enhanced by the compound, by the mixing of your blood with the venom." "Is that a problem?" he asked, suddenly concerned. "No," she said softly, taking his hand. "It's a gift. One I never expected to receive." Nick pulled her close, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him, despite their different biologies. "When I first arrived on this planet, I never imagined I'd end up bonded to an alien diplomat after sucking venom from her leg." "Life is full of surprises," she murmured, her patterns glowing with emotion. "Speaking of surprises," Nick said, "I've been offered a permanent position here. Liaison officer for Earth's military. Seems they were impressed by how I handled the crisis." Solara's eyes lit up. "You're staying?" "Wild burrowers couldn't drag me away," he assured her. "Besides, someone needs to be around in case any more deadly snakes try to bite you." "My hero," she teased, rising on tiptoes to kiss him. As they stood together, watching the stars emerge in the alien sky, Nick reflected on the strange path that had led him here. One split-second decision, to save a stranger from certain death, had changed everything. Had created a bond that transcended species, had saved an entire civilization. Sometimes the most human instinct of all, to help others without thought for oneself, turned out to be the most powerful force in the universe. And as Solara's lips found his once more, Nick knew he wouldn't have it any other way.